What's up? Welcome back to Beats by Jer. I'm your host, Jared Harris. Today's episode pays tribute to the legacy of Robbie Robertson. The Indigenous Canadian guitarist, singer, and songwriter passed away on August 9th following a battle with prostate cancer. Robertson enjoyed an eclectic career, which started as the band leader for Ronnie and the Hawks before forming The Band, a group of which would go on to have their own records but was largely known for being Bob Dylan's backing band in the mid to late 60s and again in the mid 70s, along with a lifetime collaboration with film director Martin Scorsese, along with his own solo career. As a means of looking at his legacy, we'll focus on a set of 3 albums from his career. The first being the band's eponymous sophomore album, The Band, followed by Bob Dylan's Planet Waves, and concluding with Robbie Robertson's 2016 solo album, Sinematic. Consider this a set of snapshots of the musicality and creativity that was Robbie Robertson. First, we will look at The Band, the self-titled sophomore record from The Band. For context, it is important to understand that when working with The Hawk, The Band was a cover band. A group of Canadians, save drummer Levon Helms, following Ronnie Hawkins throughout North America, performing a wide range of covers: 50s rock, R&B standards, country, gospel, soul, really anything that was popular at the time. Their grasp on American music was incredible. This was established on their debut, 1968's Music from Big Pink. Released just a year later, the band took this understanding to another level. The album was written entirely by Robertson, save 3 songs written collaboratively with Richard Manuel, and 1 more written alongside with Levon. The album opens with Across the Great Divide, a bluesy R&B song accented by bright horns and Levon's fills. Rag Mama Rag sounds like a saloon blues jam, almost proto-country, from decades prior. There are flashes of rock on Jemima Surrender, gospel and funk on King Harvest, and of course, The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down and Up on Cripple Creek are stone-cold classics. As an album, the band represented an expansion of a group's sound, something that was more conscious of popular music around them at the times, but also still nostalgic and reminiscent for the great American songbook that had come from the decades prior. The guitars on this record are subtle, blending seamlessly with keyboards, bass, and lush vocal harmonies. Robertson was, at such a young age, an exemplary songwriter and a master of subtlety. Even when the guitar has the lead, it's as though he only takes a half step forward, keeping his work simple as a means of never overshadowing the song. It was such a degree of songwriting, such attention to detail, such focus on what we would now refer to as production, focus on slow growth and tiny embellishments that attracted Bob Dylan around this era. This is also when they happened to be working on the Basement Tapes, while Dylan took time off the road following his motorcycle accident. This is also an era that saw Eric Clapton, wishing that he could have been a member of the band alongside Robertson, but also recognizing that he simply couldn't fit in with such subtlety. Truly, the band and Robertson is an exercise in restraint and taste. To play tastefully is a skill that cannot be taught, but all musicians should learn. Robertson and that entire ensemble had taste in spades. The idea of taste in the context of the band is something that is twofold. On one hand, you have such a range of influences that each member of the band is bringing to their work. Again, their time with the Hawk saw them cutting their teeth on country, blues, gospel, soul, R&B, 50s rock, right? Everything that they played was just an experience, a learning experience, and that was reflected on Music from Big Pink, that was reflected on the band. The idea of musical taste, however, really applies to the idea of a musician's ability to play tastefully. The idea of stepping forward to play a fill, a lead line, a lick, but not to overshadow the piece as a whole, right? To do so in a manner that isn't in abundance, to do so in a manner at just the right moment. It's incredibly abstract and incredibly difficult to explain. Some musicians have taste, others don't. And some have it to a far greater degree. The band and Robbie Robertson, this is where the genius of their performance lays, is in the idea of tastefully showcasing their ability in a way that never felt overbearing, never felt overwhelming. There's not a single moment that feels as though they're showing off, and yet the music they're working on is intricate within its subtleties. It fits every note feels necessary. Every piece of the puzzle fits just where it belongs within the context of everyone else's puzzle piece. And that is no easy feat. While the music may feel simple, while it may feel sparse, where the arrangements may feel minimal, there's less to hide behind. Without flash in the pan, all you have is your substance, and that substance needs to stand for something. The album The Band is a record overflowing with substance and speaks to the genius, the subtle genius of Robbie Robertson as a songwriter. It's almost as though there was an unwritten agreement surrounding anonymity in the band. There are no real stars. There is no designated lead singer. There is no designated lead guitarist. Aside from Robertson being the lead songwriter, there really is no definitive presence within the band that overshadows anyone else in the ensemble, nor the ensemble as a whole. It's a unique approach. It's something that we don't really see ever. Not now, not in the 1960s, not at a time when people like Hendrix and Page and Clapton were making such massive names for themselves as songwriters and band leaders and guitarists. Instead, in the band, you simply have the band, the ensemble, the group. Even their name speaks to an anonymous idea, allowing for the songs to speak louder than the members, allowing for the songs to speak louder than the group. It was always Bob Dylan and the band, and the name just stuck. And I think it's such a telling piece of their musical identity. It runs so rampant throughout their DNA. Their name speaks volumes of an anonymous nature. And that is how they approach their songwriting, how they approach their own individual performances within the band. And it's almost as though everyone was on the exact same page with this approach in musicality. It's something so interesting to look at, and really interesting to think about when you consider music from then, music from really any era. There is always someone within the band. It's very rare that you have a group where no one seems to overshadow the band, no one's presence overshadows someone else, and yet that in itself was at the core of the band. In the mid-70s, the band reunited with Bob Dylan to record Planet Waves. Previously, the band was the first backing band to work with Dylan as he transitioned from an acoustic act to an electric band. The tour, which saw Dylan go electric, resulted in calls of treason among the folk community. It was in 1966 that a member of the audience famously screamed Judas at Dylan, which resulted in Dylan looking at Robertson saying, "Play it fucking loud." This entire era in Dylan's career remains a point of curiosity, considering his transition to electric was similar to that of being a band like the Rolling Stones or the Beatles. It was not like Black Sabbath. It was not like Led Zeppelin. But the intention of playing with a full band and playing with electric guitars away from the simplicity of just the acoustic guitar and the voice, it raises the question of what folk music was in the 1960s and how it separated itself from the rapidly growing classic rock movement of the time. Considering Dylan's step into an electric band was a very mild transition, something that seemed in hindsight very reasonable, and like a logical step forward from what he was doing. The resistance he was met with is truly fascinating. Nonetheless, released in 1974, Planet Wave saw a reunion between the band and Dylan and would go on to be Dylan's first #1 album. Here we see the roots rock style of the band in Dylan's early 70s hit a stride. It was something that felt as much folk as it did rock. The record sounded like a middle ground between the Stones and Neil Young. It's fantastic. Once again, Robertson perfects the sublime when both acting as the rhythm and lead player. His treble-heavy tone with a slight wah shines brightest on Going, Going, Gone, Something There Is About You, and 2 versions of Forever Young, the faster of which follows the slower, sounding like an entirely different song, and yet somehow like a coda, extending the conclusion of the slower version of the song for another 3 minutes. The record is once again an exercise in restraint, an exercise in subtleties, something that we saw on the band, but we're seeing grow and evolve throughout the 1970s. On this album, Robertson takes a bit more of a lead role, but again, even when he does, it's done so with such a level of grace. It's done so with such a level of restraint and calculation that his lead lines feel as much of the rhythm track as anything else. It's so easy to understate his playing just for the simple nature of his approach to the instrument. But remember, Robertson is a songwriter first, guitar player second, or at the very least, that's how he approaches his work. And Planet Waves shines as a Bob Dylan record supported by one of the greatest bands that he worked with. And Robertson as a band leader, his ability to bring the best out of these musicians, his ability to ensure that no one is ever stepping on anyone else's feet, to find balance among such a group is something that should never be understated. The last album which we will look at today is Sinematic, the final record Robertson had ever released in 2016. While Robertson did write the theme song for Martin Scorsese's The Irishman, released that same year, along with songs I Hear You Paint Houses and Remembrance, both appearing in the film's credits, Sinematic may have been inspired by The Irishman, but it was an album all on its own. I actually had the pleasure of speaking to Robertson ahead of the release of the album and The Irishman. I was given a 20-minute slot in the middle of the day, which typically means that the artist being interviewed is doing interviews back-to-back all day long. As a writer, you want to stand out. You want to ask the questions that haven't been asked, but 20 minutes isn't a lot of time, and there are questions that must be asked about the project they're doing the current press cycle on. Sometimes this leads to a disinterested artist giving the same answers to the same questions all day, often bitter and tired. Robertson was not like this at all. He was passionate, he was kind, and excited by his work on the album, and excited to still be working with Scorsese after all these years, and of course excited to be sharing his work. There was such a level of passion in the way he spoke about songwriting and Sinematic. His excitement shone through as he reflected on the making of Sinematic, telling me, "This particular record, I've never had an experience like this before. Just when you think you've seen it all, there is always a surprise around the corner. All of these spokes of the wheel of these different projects I was working on all seemed to connect at the center. They all ended up being a part of Sinematic. It's a wonderful feeling. Furthermore, Robertson reflected on the legacy of the band, something that was celebrating their 50th anniversary at the time, stating, "It's not for me to say what the significance of the band's legacy is. I'm quite proud that this music and this influence on so much of music has gone on and on and on. And this 50th anniversary is coming up, and the music and the story seems to be lingering timelessly in the air. For that, I am truly grateful." Sinematic is a stark album. I Hear You Paint Houses is surprisingly upbeat, considering it's about murder for hire. The song is a collaboration with Van Morrison, but Robertson's guitar tone, a modern adaptation of his signature trebly wah, steals the show. His lead lines, likely the most present they've ever been. Tasteful, minimal, and somehow buried in the mix. Once We Were Brothers reflects on the end of the band and the loss of friendship with a sense of longing, a sense of yearning for connection. Dead End Kid is driven by a dark feel, following an even darker narrative. For this song, in my interview, Robertson actually described it as, "It really is just a reflection of a period. I don't know where it was going to go, and some strange words were coming to me. The first words I wrote were, 'I stole a Bible,' and I thought, oh, we're getting somewhere." The song itself is prolific. There's an air of danger and mystery, and like much of Sinematic, it plays like a cinematic noir piece. Shanghai Blues is another example of this, with Robertson's gravelly voice sounding damn near murderous. Sinematic is compelling, each song telling a story with an instrumental track that could set the stage of a film, ultimately living up to the album's name. Robertson finds such a unique sense of beauty and seedy vibes. The noir-sounding album, something that feels desolate at times, is strikingly brilliant. With his passing, there is a certain era that goes with Robertson. While roots rock, classic rock, and folk all have evolved past the sounds of the band and Dylan's mid-70s output, his generation of artists grows smaller. Of the band, only Garth Hudson remains. More than just about the bands he performed with and the styles of music he played, Robertson represents a means of writing and performing, something often forgotten about when remembering a generation that welcomed distortion and soaring guitar solos. There's a level of substance in his writing that was timeless, remaining prolific and even cutting at times, still today. In today's culture, a culture itself that thrives on a faster pace and a shorter collective attention span, we're losing the art of subtlety. The art of sublime is one that is soulful, one of taste, and one often neglected. Robertson was the master of such, and it is important to remember what value he brought to popular music through his playing and songwriting. Robertson's legacy lies in such subtlety. This is something that Dylan would continue throughout the rest of his career. This is something that was essential to the working man appeal of artists like Bruce Springsteen and Tom Petty, something that allowed for musicians to not play the role of typical rock star, but instead focus on being a traveling troubadour, a musician with a song and a story to tell. And there truly is something powerful about just a guitar and a compelling narrative. Something that makes a song feel complete, no matter the arrangement, no matter who is singing it. A good song is a good song. And if Robertson has shown us anything, it's that you don't need much in order to make a song cut deep. Most importantly, perhaps, is the chapter in the American Songbook, written by an Indigenous boy from Toronto. Follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Beats by Jer. I'm Jared Harris, and this has been Beats by Jer.